African leaders want colonial-era abuses recognised and criminalised. Algeria says a legal framework would ensure reparations are neither a gift nor a favour. So how could former colonial powers be held accountable? And can the cost of those atrocities be measured? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. No repentance or apologies for colonial abuses. Instead, French President Emmanuel Macron opted for what he called symbolic acts that promote reconciliation. 4 years on, the Algiers Declaration is reigniting the debate about colonialism, historical injustice and reparations. Algeria's Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf is calling for a legal framework to hold former European colonial powers accountable for crimes committed during their rule. Britain has paid almost $20 million in compensation to more than 5,000 Kenyans tortured and abused by the colonial administration. And Germany has agreed to pay Namibia $1.1 billion over a 30-year period in the form of development aid. But with the continent as a whole still paying a heavy price for colonialism, which other African countries should receive reparations? And can the true cost of colonial-era abuses even be measured? We'll explore those issues with our guests in a moment. But first, this report by Katia Lopez-Hodoyan.
A renewed push by African leaders for European governments to formally recognize, criminalize, and pay for colonial-era crimes. The African Union discussed the matter in Ethiopia back in February. Now it's been addressed again, this time in Algeria. The country spent more than 130 years as a French colony. During the 8-year war for independence that ended in 1962, as many as 1.5 million Algerians were killed. The foreign minister is now calling for a legal framework that ensures restitution for African states isn't seen as a gift or a favor.
Africa is entitled to demand the official and explicit recognition of the crimes committed against its people during the colonial period, an indispensable first step toward addressing the consequences of that era, for which African countries and peoples continue to pay a heavy price, in terms of exclusion, marginalization, and progress.
In previous years, French President Emmanuel Macron, who once acknowledged colonization as a crime against humanity, has ruled out formal apologies. Like other European leaders, he stopped short of offering financial reparations for its colonial past, focusing instead on symbolic gestures aimed at promoting reconciliation.
Many people want to make Algeria an issue for French domestic politics. And in Algeria, many people want to make the relationship with France an issue of Algerian politics. If we let the people on both sides set the agenda, there is no chance of making progress.
It's a debate echoing across Africa and Europe, one that includes mounting pressure on Western museums to return stolen artifacts. Colonialism has affected virtually all corners of the world. The French occupied countries across West and Central Africa, including Niger, Burkina Faso, and Morocco. The British Empire colonized Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, and many others, while Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau were under Portuguese rule for centuries. These legacies were often marked by systematic violence, economic exploitation, stolen land, and cultural oppression. A dark and brutal history that some analysts say is in the past, but others argue it has consequences that are very much part of the present. Some African leaders say the United Nations sidesteps the issue by avoiding the use of the word colonizer in its charter, which makes it difficult, they say, to hold colonizers in Africa and beyond accountable. Katia Lopez-Hodoyan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
OK, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Lyon in France is Abdelkader Abderrahmane, an independent researcher and co-author of The Politics of Algeria. Liliane Umubyeyi is the co-founder and executive director of African Futures Lab, a non-governmental organisation that focuses on racial injustice in Africa and Europe. She joins us from Brussels. And in Paris is Nicolas Normand, a former French ambassador to Mali, Senegal and Congo. A warm welcome to you all. Abdelkader, I'll start with you if I may. What are the legal challenges in defining colonialism as a crime against humanity under international law?
Thank you for having me. What are the legal challenges? It's difficult to answer this question, but I think the main aspect of this challenges would be to genuinely acknowledge this issue of colonialism. I think that as long as those former colonial powers would not genuinely acknowledge and accept the wrongdoings, the atrocities they conducted in Africa, in Algeria, that would be difficult to make any move forward. So the first step would be for the French, for instance, is that to clearly acknowledge and apologize for these atrocities they committed for a long period of time.
Liliane, what do you see as the legal challenges, and has the AU, or what the AU is proposing, will that overcome any there might be?
I would start by saying that slavery has been recognized as crimes against humanity. This was done during the Durban Declaration. However, colonialism hasn't been defined as a crimes against humanity, and that's one of the key demands that these states are putting forward. That being said, certain specific institutions like the Court of Appeal in Brussels recently has considered that the abduction of mixed-race children by colonial administration, in that case the Belgian state, constitutes a crimes against humanity. So we have certain specific cases where it is colonial acts or crimes are considered as crimes against humanity, but as such, there is no a general reckoning of that definition. That being said, there's also a general recommendation by CERD, which is the International Committee on Against Racial Discrimination, which has put a draft recommendation recently to say that states have an obligation, in this case, former colonial powers have an obligation to pay reparations for slavery, but also for the continuous crimes that result from slavery. That being, this means this implies colonialism and colonial crimes.
All right, Nicola, is this the right path to go down in the first place? If you're addressing the issue of how and why and when reparations should be paid, do you first have to acknowledge that colonialism was a crime against humanity?
Well, it's a complicated issue. I think the Western former colonizing powers have to recognize the crimes that were made during the colonization. There were many crimes, violence, racism, discrimination, humiliation. But this is not an economic issue, basically. It's a moral and political issue. From an economic point of view, there were also some advantages of colonization in terms of infrastructures, investments, education, health progress, and so on. So on the one hand, there were many political, moral crimes and disadvantages. On the other hand, there were also some economic and health advantages in colonization. Anyway, it's impossible to take stock, to assess the colonization from a financial point of view, because how to measure the economic disadvantages. And anyway, there were also several colonization. If you take the case of Algeria, they were first colonized by the Roman Empire, then by the Arabs from the 7th century onwards, then by the Ottoman Empire. There is discussion because Many people say it's not really colonization by the Ottomans. It was a very soft colonization with much autonomy. I agree with that. And then there was the French conquest, which was very violent, and the war of independence of Algeria, which was full with crimes also. But in the middle, between the colonization, there was humiliation, discrimination, apartheid, right, on the one hand. On the other hand, there was an enhancement of the natural resources. There was an economic development. So it's not really an economic issue. Anyway, if there is some kind of financial reparation, it would mean just an increase of the official development assistance that already exists. It's worldwide, it's about $250 billion. For Africa alone, it's more than $50 billion a year. So that could be increased, but if it is increased in terms of cash, of budgetary aid, there would be a risk of corruption, of waste, of embezzlement. Probably the population would not benefit it. It's the reason why the ODA is mainly devoted to projects, not to financial aid.
All right. Nicholas, I can sense our guests in Brussels and Lyon itching to respond to a few of your points there. With you, Liliane, first of all. So it's not really, it shouldn't just be about money, because anyway, the Europeans couldn't afford it. It's more about a moral responsibility. And anyway, apparently there were some benefits of colonialism. What do you say?
I would start by saying that, by starting with two key examples. If we took like two key examples, two key issues that African countries are facing today, which is the climate crisis, but also the debt crisis. These two major issues, many reports have shown that they have their roots in the colonial extraction and extractive processes that have been going on for the last 5 centuries. And we know that they have economic consequences. If we look at the debt crisis, we know that 22 countries, African countries, are in debt distress and they don't have the means and the resources to put that financial resources into education, into health. That's the first major challenge. The second challenge is the climate crisis. Africa, and there was the UN report saying that it's very clear that the climate crisis that Africa is facing is a result of the colonial extraction and extractive processes. Because Africa has only contributed to 4% of the global emissions. However, it is giving, or is 5% of its annual GDP is spent into facing the climate crisis. So I think it's, I would say, not intellectually honest to say that it has nothing to do with the contemporary economic challenges that countries are facing today. A second element that I would like to add is that we can't put on the same level development assistance with all the limits that we know that this development assistance has in terms of favoring global North interests to the same level as reparations. Reparations, when we talk about reparations, when you talk reparative justice in a legal sense, it's mean like undoing the harm that has been done. Yes. It has nothing to do with charity, with assistance. And there's a UN report that has been written by 8 UN special rapporteurs in the case of Namibia, because Germany has been saying that the 1 billion euros that is giving to Namibia, this constitutes a reparation for the genocide in Namibia. But it's clear and has been put clearly by these UN rapporteurs that reparations and development assistance has nothing to do, and they shouldn't be put on it's two different conversations.
All right. Abdelkader, one of the points we were hearing is that there will be a reluctance, there has been a historical reluctance of European powers to pay reparations because of the incredible costs that it would involve. How do you make the argument that cash needs to be paid in terms of reparations when there's so much resistance to it?
I mean, of course they have to pay. I mean, I'm puzzled when I hear that colonialism brought some positive aspects and didn't have any economic negative aspect in Africa. When I look at the case of Algeria, when I see that the Algerian population was not able to go to school, or very little, a minimum little number of people who would be able to go to school, how could they, once they got independence in 1962, how could they conduct the economy of the country without having any school background? So when I hear that there is no economic negative aspect, it's difficult to accept such an argument. Now they have to pay. There is a compensation to pay. What it is, I'm not sure. I think that this is something that has to be done case by case through discussions, dialogue. But at the end of the day, we cannot say that there will not be any compensation or financial compensation for these countries. I would like to state what the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Algeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, said yesterday, when he said that Algeria's Sahara still carries in its grains the scars of French nuclear testings. And I think that this summarizes a lot of what is happening and what is going on today. The scars and the impacts, the consequences of colonialism in Algeria and in the whole of Africa is immense, and there must be a financial compensation. There must be apologies for that.
Abdelkader, can I say to you that, I mean, Emmanuel Macron said, that people, particularly with reference to Algeria, shouldn't dwell on past injustices. Is there a risk that you create more division today by doing this rather than moving forward?
The division that you're talking about is something that the French are creating, and they've been creating for years. I mean, when you look at the suburbs in France, whether it is in Lyon, in Paris, in Bordeaux, in Marseille, wherever, you see that the youth in the suburbs, which is for the vast majority of African and North African background, doesn't have any historical background of their grandfathers. There is no teaching of French history in North Africa. There's no teaching of French history present in Algeria, in Zaire, in Senegal, in Mali. So how can this youth, this French youth, because it is a French youth, how can they sense a French belonging when a part of their own history is not taught at school?
Okay,
when you look at the school textbook today, you see that there's no teaching of French colonialism, or very little French colonialism teaching in those books. So how can you build a nation, a united French nation, when a large part of its history is completely neglected, if not ignored, by the same French authorities that are calling now for a united and common history?
Right. Nicolas, I want to pick you up on just one of the points you made about colonialism. I think you would appreciate and know that it frustrates a lot of people who lived in what were former colonies when they hear that colonialism brought them some benefits. When you weigh that against the millions of people who were sold into slavery, or the millions of people who died of famine, or the millions of people who were mistreated, it's difficult to make that comparison, isn't it? Isn't that one of the frustrations of people who lived in former colonies, that they sometimes thought they should be grateful for some of the things that were brought to them?
Well, anyway, I think there should be more apology. In my opinion, repentance should be undertaken. Maybe not on colonization overall, but on specific issues during the colonization period. There were a number of massacres which are well documented during the colonization period. For them, there should be ceremonies of repentance and official apology. In terms of financial compensation, it's impossible to offset such crimes by just paying cash money. Maybe in a very few specific cases, the lady put forward, she was right, the genocide in Namibia, and the Germans paid for it because it was a well-documented and recognized genocide against the population. It was not totally consistent with colonization. Colonization, normally, the goal of colonization is not to undertake genocide and to massacre the population. There are massacres when there is riots, resistance, wars, but colonization is an economic activities for the settlers, and it's based on inequality, on exploitation, not really on looting normally, because it's a way to enhance natural resources. So the colonized countries have not been handicapped normally. There is not a legacy of looting, in my opinion. There is a legacy of investment and economic development, but not of looting, except in a few cases. In the Belgian Congo, there was obviously a looting by the Belgian king about caoutchouc, and the population was very badly treated. It was almost a genocide. Yes. There were concentration camps. So they have made apologies for that. The king, the Belgian king, has made apologies for that officially, and he was right to do it. But in terms of financial offset, financial compensation, it's very difficult to deal with that.
People might add to that, though, also the British in Kenya and the French in Algeria. And so, yes, I'll let you come back on that, Abdelkader.
Yes, I think that I'm appalled when I hear that there was no genocide. I think that this allow me to draw a parallel with what is going on in Gaza today. I mean, when it serves the interest of some people, then there is no genocide. When it serves the interest of the others, then there is genocide. How can we not say that there was no genocide in Algeria when we know, and it is well documented by French historians themselves, that people were killed, were massacred by thousands, by tens of thousands, when they were killed and burned alive in caves? How can we not talk about genocide? How can we not talk about massacres during not only during the 1954-1962 period, but from 1932? I mean, this is all well documented. People were massacred. People were killed just alive. They were beheaded. How can we not say that this was genocide, just simply because at one point we accept, or we just refuse to use the term genocide when it doesn't serve our own purposes? And this is not something that we can still accept in 1925. So no, yes, there was genocide in Algeria, there was genocide in Genocide. There was genocide in Namibia, and there was genocide in many other places. So how can we talk about just economic issues when it comes to colonization? Colonization in Algeria was not something to do with economic issue only. Okay. It was a massacre. I mean, a quarter of the population that was alive in 1932 was then massacred 20, 30 years later. So how can we not talk about genocide? I mean, I'm really appalled when I hear that today. I mean, in 2025, that we should be talking about something else, but not dwelling upon the issue of whether this is a definition of genocide or not.
Nicola, quickly as possible, what do you say to that?
It's difficult to know whether there was genocide in Algeria, for instance. I leave that to historians and specialists. There were crimes, there were massacres, there is no doubt about that. But the genocide has a precise legal definition. So I don't know if there is a consensus about its application to Algeria. But I think that... anyway, this kind of issue cannot be dealt with financially speaking only. In a few cases, it's easy to pay financial compensation. If you see the World War I, Germany attacked France and devastated part of France. So the damage was well visible, and it was easy to assess the cost of the damage. So just at the end of the war, there was a treaty according to which Germany had to pay a compensation. By the way, they did not pay the full compensation.
Okay, Nicholas,
at least it was easy. It was easy to define the cost. You know, for the colonization, many years afterwards, it's very difficult to define the cost.
All right, Liliane, but with you now, just as we're wrapping up. Often the argument is also used that paying vast amounts of compensation, particularly to African countries, is a suitable diversion for some African leaders from addressing their own real current time issues in terms of corruption, in terms of weak governance. And there is an argument, is there about that?
I will respond to that question, but before that, I would like to respond to the former ambassador who said that it will be complicated. But when we look back in history, we see that slave owners were compensated by France, by UK. UK has recently finished to compensate the slave owners and managed to get a grant that was like 40% of its GDP to pay the slave owners, and it finished to pay that loan like in 2015. So when there is a will, there's means to compensate. The problem is that we have in history we have compensated, or states have compensated slave owners instead of compensating victims. This is the same for Haiti. Haiti has compensated France instead of seeing France compensating the slaves. So I think we can't say that it will be difficult, because in the past there are multiple examples where we can look at and see that it was possible. So to get back to the question that this is a distraction, I think, as I was saying at the beginning, we cannot understand the current challenges of African governments and African states if we don't look at that history of colonialism and neocolonialism, the continuous extractions. And I think if we want to talk about destruction, I think we should look at these different approaches that are somehow trying to divert the conversation on the process of extraction, and that say, oh, it's something that has passed. It has nothing with the economic situation. It has nothing to do with political interventions of France in multiple countries. So I think this is more like the destruction that what you call asking for justice, because it's an issue about justice, which is which should be at the center of the conversation on the contemporary challenges of Africa.
Okay, thanks to our guests, to Abdelkader Abderrahmane, to Liliane Umubyeyi and Nicolas Normand, and thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.